Hi, I'm Jim McCann, founder of 1-800-Flowers. We created this podcast to share the wonderful people we get to interact with, we get to meet, we get to know, and most importantly, get to learn from. So I invite you to join us on this journey here on the Celebrations Chatter podcast.
Hello.
Hey, Lee, how are you?
Good. How are you?
All right. So, Lee, tell me about the crazy industry you're in. The big industry, but
Yes.
boy, it's got to be different. And when you go to the neighborhood barbecue and people say, oh, what do you do? What do you do? What happens when you tell them I'm in the deathcare industry?
A lot of them go, what? What? What did you say? What did you say? And then my husband says, you heard that. And then he usually makes some kind of joke like, she only gives one-time discounts.
There's got to be 100 of those, right?
Or she puts the fun in funeral.
Tell me what, I'd love to know your career path. You're a young person, obviously, but tell us about where you're from.
So I was born in Israel, came to America as an immigrant. My parents immigrated here when I was 7 years old. And I went to college in Boston. And before you go further, I'll stop you and say, you look like my daughter-in-law, who was also born in Israel and came here as a young girl. Yes. Had the same nice hair. How funny is that?
Yep. So go ahead. So you came here. Where'd you settle?
So we lived in New York, New Jersey. And then I went to school in Boston. And after college, I wanted to work in the food business. And back then, I wanted to become a food photographer.
You went to Brandeis?
I did. I went to Brandeis.
Good for you.
And a friend of mine, his mom was a food photographer. Nowadays, that's just called Instagram. But back then, it was a real job. And she said, if you want to become a food photographer, you should go work for a food company. And I was lucky enough to be hired by a company that ended up becoming Naked Juice. It was a startup at the time. And we became Naked Juice.
Now, Lee, where in New Jersey?
I lived in Livingston, New Jersey.
Okay, right next door to my daughter-in-law, who was in Fairlawn.
Oh, fantastic. Yep, absolutely.
And are you one of those people, Lee, when you go out to dinner and you get a really nice meal, that you're taking pictures of it?
Yes, maybe. Yes.
That's a young person's phenomenon. I see it all the time. I get a kick out of it.
Right.
I'm too busy eating.
It is fun. It is fun to post those food pictures. But yeah, so I started my career there. And after that, I went...
So you went from the naked company to the deathcare industry.
Yeah. And in between, I stopped it. It's interesting because I started my career in this super frequent use case category, right? Juice. People drink it multiple times a week and they buy it multiple times a week. And then after Naked Juice, I went to business school and then to technology where I worked in high use case categories. So couponing multiple times a week. Every Sunday, people would check out coupons, right? Multiple times a week. And then gaming multiple times a day.
And look at how those industries have changed with technology. Where did you go to business school?
I went to Harvard Business School back in Massachusetts.
Oh, good for you. So you go into the couponing industry. Look at how that's changing. It's really breakneck pace there on change.
So much change. And then all of a sudden I went into really infrequent categories. So auto repair, fine jewelry, and now death care. And so it's been really interesting to see how consumers act so differently. And in your category too, right? The frequency is, especially in flowers, right? It must be very different than in personalized goods, for example.
Very different. We're all of our categories are giftable categories. Obviously, we don't just do gifts, but everything we sell is giftable. Right. We have self-consumption too in flowers and in all of our food brands like Harry and David, but primarily gifting. Yeah. And you have people who are super frequent gifters and people who gift just a few times a year.
Right, of course. So death care is a very infrequent category.
And I think it's really interesting because it's uncomfortable for people to talk about. People want to make believe it doesn't exist,
correct?
But indeed it does. And therein lies some opportunities for someone like you, Lee, who's a student of consumers, someone who's dedicated all of their education and all of their professional career to try and understand their consumption, their behaviors, their motivations. And then you wind up in a specialized industry like the deathcare industry. And I think that's an interesting career path. And I bet you've developed some interesting insights into our behaviors. And I can't help but start out by, first of all, how long have you been with Foundation Partners?
About 3 years, just under 3 years.
It's a fairly new company. Was it 2010 it was formed?
Correct.
So interesting category, a young company. You're with it just a few years. So you joined right at the beginning of one of the biggest change forcing factors to impact your industry, maybe in 100 years. Tell me, how did COVID impact your industry and your company?
There were a lot of changes that happened because of COVID, obviously. I mean, COVID impacted all of us. So I think for us specifically, there were a few things. So one was it accelerated the rate of change. I think there were a lot of people who just didn't believe that such an infrequent category could sustain change. Would someone ever want to do a funeral over Zoom? And the answer was, yes, they do. They do want that. And so we proved that as a category, people were willing to consume celebrations in a different way. So that was one thing that COVID really unpacked for the industry, where there were a lot of naysayers. All of a sudden, consumers said, well, I'd rather be able to celebrate virtually someone's life than not celebrate at all. So that was one of the positive things that came out of it.
We were all struggling back at the beginning. It seemed to be once or twice a month we get a note about so-and-so's passing. We'll do just a very small, immediate family kind of service, and we'll convene as a group when it's safe enough for us to do so. And that was a strange thing that happened to us all. We didn't know how should we express ourselves. Should we send something? We were at a loss, and that's where you and your company and the industry you're in have to be fast afoot and figure out what best to advise your clients.
Exactly. We also have a service that's a cremation in the cloud service. And most people look at me and say, what? What is that? Cremation in the cloud.
Well, let me say, what? What was that?
So it literally is what it sounds. So you can go to our website, tulipcremation.com, and tell us where your loved one is located. And after we verify that that is the correct information, we pick up your loved one and take them into our care, cremate them, and return the ashes to you via USPS. This was a massively useful service during COVID where...
That's so interesting. I'd not heard of that.
Mm-hmm. And this became very, very important, especially during COVID, where you had family members in different states than their loved ones. And continues to be a service that's being adopted by more and more families today who simply choose to plan out of and arrange out of the comfort of their home and simply don't want to go to a funeral home. Or they live in a new place. They don't know the funeral home that's been local to that town for the last 3 generations. They're just not familiar with it, and they choose to arrange online. We want to give them that choice.
How many new funeral homes open a year, just in the U.S.?
I actually think we're seeing less funeral homes. We're seeing more funeral homes close than necessarily open. So the number,
really?
Yes, there are about 19,000 funeral homes in the U.S., and we're seeing more consolidation. And a lot of that, Jim, is because the funeral home business is typically a succession business.
Yes.
Meaning families, many of the funeral homes in the U.S. were opened in the 1950s, like in the 1940s and 50s, post-World War II, and they've been handed down through generations of families who were serving their communities. Now, a lot of the children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren of those families don't want to take over the family business. This is actually something I saw when I worked in auto repair and in fine jewelry, very similar spaces.
And in floral, too.
I can imagine.
No, our florists work very hard. These are hard, physically demanding jobs. We all crack up when the young folks come walking into us. Oh, it must be so nice to work with flowers. And we're on our feet now for the 11th hour, and our hands are throbbing from all the thorns that we've been dealing with. And yeah, it's really nice to work with us. But you're seeing that in all bakers,
Exactly.
small shop owners, construction companies, small the kids going to school and want to go work on Wall Street or hang around with smart people like you at corporate.
Or go to Google, right? The reason they're called funeral homes is because the families used to literally live in them. Before we had cell phones, the phone would ring all hours of the night, and the funeral director would have to go to a family's home and help them in their time of need when their loved one would pass away. So these, like you said, are really difficult businesses to operate, and it's not meant for everyone. This lifestyle is not meant for everyone. And so we see actually a lot of them being consolidated rather than more of them necessarily opening up. And COVID did not help that, Jim, because there was a lot of compassion fatigue. And that was, I think, the other big piece of this, is that we had to learn how to be a lot more empathetic to our employees.
But you had to be a lot more empathetic and understanding and consoling to your employees, and they to their families both, right?
Yeah, I'm really, really lucky to work in this industry because we have so many compassionate, caring people.
Well, everyone I know, I grew up in Queens, New York, and I was listening as you said, these are people who, the family businesses that expanded. I remember as a kid, my dad was a painting contractor, and we had contracts with several funeral home operators. They were all exceptionally nice and thoughtful people to a person. And they all migrated east to Long Island when I was a kid and opened up another branch. As their customers moved from Queens out to Nassau and Suffolk counties, they followed the migratory pattern. That's why I would have expected that there's new funeral homes opening in the growth areas, the Sun Belt, Florida, Texas, the Southeast, Arizona, where there wouldn't, all these new homes and buildings and housing communities are going up, but there wouldn't have been a traditional funeral home in place to serve them.
A lot of them existed, and now what we're seeing is not the traditional home per se opening up, but more arrangement centers.
Arrangement centers. Tell us about that.
So, for example, we purchased a company last year called Baldwin Brothers in Florida, where instead of the traditional funeral home that maybe you're used to seeing and growing up with, where it was a physical home, they're opening smaller facilities and strip malls.
Really? Mm-hmm. Interesting. And what will go on in those facilities?
Well, what happens is a lot of pre-planning. So one other thing that the pandemic did is actually make more people talk about death, for better or worse. So for worse, because more of it happened; for better, because to your point earlier, it's going to happen to all of us. And so not talking about it doesn't make it go away. And so having more people plan for it, we know when we serve a family that's prepared, it makes it that much easier for everybody that they leave behind.
To hear your vocabulary, Lee, we're in adjacent industries, in that a big and important piece of our business at 1-800-Flowers is expressions of sympathy. And it seems that how you lead from a marketing branding perspective is service first. How do I serve our community? We're more and more trying to be like that ourselves. So when we think about how do we expand our sympathy business, which has been a long contracting piece of the florist a pie of the mix of business we do, ours has been growing for the last half a dozen years. Not because there's growth in the sector, but because we took the path that you did and that you do, which is to say, how can we service our customers around this subject? So we do mimic a lot of what you do, Lee, and say, how do we load our website with a lot of helpful information? As you say, this is not a subject people are comfortable talking about. So let's answer those tough questions. Let's gather experts like you, Lee, and what we're doing right now is tapping into having those conversations, finding the experts, and bringing that information to our community. We found that the best way to market is not to market, but to lead with a service-first agenda, just like it sounds like you do.
That's exactly what we do. We find that because this is infrequent, and fortunately, people only have to buy our service once or twice in their life, we have to lead with service. And so the way that we think about it, even every meeting I have with my team, we say before every single meeting, Our number one goal is to serve our families. Our number two goal is to serve those in the field who serve our families. So we always think about our goal, our role in corporate is to serve those who serve the families in the field. Because at the end of the day, it's all of us coming together that makes the worst day of someone's life a little bit easier. Because we're not selling a party, we're not selling a wedding, we're not selling a birth of a baby, we're not selling the best day of your life. And so we have to put that lens to everything. When I first joined Foundation Partners Group, I did not have a background in this space. I mean, I came from the jewelry business, also commemorative, but in a very different way. Even though jewelry is actually a very, very large seller for us because a lot of families commemorate loss with jewelry.
Really?
Yes. And especially now, there's so much innovation around taking ashes and making them into pieces of jewelry. I think we're also very fortunate, Jim, because for us, we're an 88% cremation company.
It's another wow. I would never have guessed that.
Yeah, I have a lot of those like really interesting tidbits and facts that at dinner people say wow about. So the United States right now is at 59% cremation.
Well, that's my next question, because it was pre-COVID. It was less than 50. And Canada was way ahead of us on percentage basis. But it sounds like COVID really accelerated that.
COVID really accelerated. That was another big
So
change.
59% now nationally.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then tell me why is Foundation Partners at 88%? What causes that?
So we took a very intentional focus of building our company with a cremation first mindset because we believe that's where the world is going.
Just jumping the trend.
So we purchased and partnered with firms that were cremation first. Actually, a lot of the firms that we purchased were actually considered the black sheep of the industry. One of the firms we purchased were Cremation Society of Minnesota. It was one of the first cremation societies in Minnesota, literally back in the 80s, that introduced cremation in that state. So we took a very innovative approach to this industry. Cremation is probably one of the biggest innovations to hit this industry, which is very strange to say because cremation in other parts of the world is at 100%. You look at somewhere like Japan, it's 100% cremation.
100%. Wow.
Mm-hmm. So it's strange to say that it's quote unquote innovative, but in some of the Western countries, including ours, including
Sure.
Israel, for example, it's innovative because it has not been the norm until now.
Well, that surprised me that you talk about cremation in Israel, because I would have thought there'd be, I seem to recall that there were religious prohibitions.
Correct. 0% cremation. It's the opposite. It's not the norm at all. So,
okay.
Right. It's interesting. So for us here in the US, it's climbing towards that higher rate. But we took a bet on that, which means there are so many other forms. There are so many other ways to permanently memorialize than there are with burial.
Yep.
So you can be made into a diamond. You can be scattered at sea.
I couldn't be made into a diamond.
Oh, you could be. I promise.
I don't have the right carbon.
I can make you into a blue diamond, a green diamond. I can't, but one of my partners can.
So tell us about that. That's a surpriser.
Yeah, so we partner with a company called Eternova, and they take ashes and make them into diamonds. They go through the same process that is used to make a lab diamond, and they use the carbon from the ashes to make your loved one into a lab diamond. They could be your loved human or your loved pet. They do this for pet lovers as well. We partner with another company that does this for pearls. They can make you into a pearl. We partner with companies who can scatter you at sea. A lot of actually our customers request sterile vials so that they can have their loved ones' ashes be tattooed. So you'd be really surprised at the things I get asked for.
Yes, I would be, and yes, I am.
But it's interesting because the ability to commemorate and memorialize your loved one has really been expanded with this move towards cremation.
And geography, I would think, contributes to that, because we have a second home in Florida, on the west coast of Florida, in the Naples area. And knowing that I was going to have the treat of speaking with you this week, I was down there last weekend, and I was saying, geez, is there a funeral chapel down here? And I don't know of one in the area. I'm sure there is, and I'm sure it's not on the main drags that I'm going to be on most of the time because it would have been there for a while. But I'm saying with all the people down here, I don't know of a funeral home.
That's very strange because yes, we have a lot of them in Florida.
Yep. But I would imagine that most people are not buried or interned in any way there, that they're going to return to where they're from.
Many of them are. Many of them are. I had a situation this week of somebody who was cremated in Florida but wanted to be returned to New York. So to your point, because a lot of people have second homes, but they have maybe a family plot in England or up in the New York area.
Go to 1-800-Flowers.com.
Find the perfect gift.
And wow the people you love.
Wow. This is amazing.
Whether you want to say happy birthday.
So cute.
Or I love you.
I love you too. Thinking of you.
Wow.
Go to 1-800-Flowers.com. Celebrate the people you love.
Now, the other thing I noticed during COVID, Lee, is that the sense, and with cremation, that my guess is here that this would lend to the same phenomenon. That is, so you lose somebody, they're in Northern California, but they're originally from the East Coast. And now they're saying, well, there's no need to rush. Maybe they do a cremation, and now they're saying, well, let's arrange an appropriate tribute to Uncle John, but let's do it 2 weeks from Saturday, and that'll give people time to prepare and to travel and to come in, and because we don't have to go to a funeral home because he's already been cremated, let's go to Uncle John's favorite restaurant, maybe on a Saturday afternoon between a lunch and a dinner. And is that a trend that you see? And how do you involve yourself with helping the families on all that planning and preparation and advice?
Such a great question. We absolutely see this. We absolutely see this. And I talk about this with a lot of my industry colleagues, which is a lot of folks want to commemorate somewhere outside of a funeral home or a religious institution, because to your point, now that there is not a physical body, now that you have an urn or ashes or a diamond, in my case, it will be a diamond. My husband's not very happy with that, but we'll deal with that. It just depends on who goes first. They want to do exactly what you said. And one of the areas of growth for golf clubs is life memorials.
Wow. Interesting. Because it's one of their favorite places. It's outdoors. It's got a nature feel to it. And they have the catering capability. And
why not? They have the catering capability.
I wouldn't have guessed that. But once again, it makes sense.
But to the second part of your question, people don't know what to do, because the catering hall at a golf club hasn't done a lot of these, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to set it up. They don't know
where Foundation Partners comes in.
That's where we come in. So that I think there's still a large opportunity to serve families and help them with that exact problem, because it's interesting. I can go out and source information so easily about, I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, how to put,
so you're not busy at all.
No. My weekends are not spent in hockey or soccer or any of those things. But it's really easy to source information on how to throw, a birthday party with whatever theme you want for your child, or a baby shower with whatever theme, or a bridal shower with whatever theme. But there isn't a ton of information about how to throw a celebration of life for someone.
And the idea of how do you market yourself? You market yourself by being a service provider first. And here's another case. But I bet if you look back, you're only a 13-year-old company, but I bet the evolution's been kind of dramatic in an industry that's not seen a lot of evolution, certainly no revolution until perhaps COVID. But now you forced yourself to expand the range of services you provide for your families by being party planners and event planners, and into providing orchestration activities between the golf club, the restaurant, the travel company, the hotel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. Well, I also think that the trust in technology has been elevated because of COVID. So when I first joined, I think there was a lot of fear that I was going to take away the job of the funeral director.
Yep.
What is this chief digital officer? What is she going to do? Take away our jobs. That's never my intent. This is a highly personal people-to-people business. That will never change. We need our funeral directors.
But your job is to change the tools or the bullets in the gun belt of that service provider so that they have those tools so that they can broaden the range of their services, I would assume.
Exactly.
So training, digital access, and helping them to come to learn to do the things that their client families need them to do now.
Exactly. And it's similar. What are your expectations today of a service provider? I know when I just went to buy a new car, I want you
to do it all.
I want you to text me. I don't want to have to call a dealership and wait for somebody to call me back as you're assigning my lead to a salesperson. And then I have to come in. I know what I want to buy. I know how much I can spend. I just text me and tell me when I can come to see the car. So the world has changed so much. And our expectations as consumers are created by the things we buy frequently. And so we learn, we begin to expect them even on the things we buy infrequently. And so I'll give you an example. I'm assuming you purchase things from Amazon or Instacart or Uber.
I've not heard of any of these companies.
Ever, right? Or actually, I'll use your company. I just ordered flowers for my mentor the other day. He just came back from Florida. I wanted to welcome him and his wife back home. He just came back up to New England.
Oh, but I was in Florida. Maybe I saw him.
Maybe. He was actually in Sarasota. So I ordered flowers from 1-800-Flowers. I ordered him. He was very happy. Sent me a picture, beautiful bouquet of tulips. And I received an email and a text that said, your flowers have been delivered. And I was so happy because there's always like that moment where you want to make sure that your flowers were delivered to that person. And I was so happy.
You're exposing yourself a little bit there. You're taking a chance and you want to close the loop.
And you want to know you surprised them, right?
Yes.
So it would have been, that's way better than me having to call 1-800-Flowers and asking, did my flowers get to Richard? Did my flowers get there? Right? You don't want that because for you, Jim, that would cost money. For me, I'd have to waste my time trying to find 10 minutes to call.
And we didn't surprise and delight the customer if they have to call us.
Exactly.
How much of your time and attention is spent on training and innovation with the range of services that those local funeral directors of yours provide?
It's ongoing. It never stops. It's ongoing.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, what's the ownership of Foundation Partners?
We're a private equity backed company. We're a private company.
So started as a private equity company, private equity incited company?
We have our lead sponsor is a company called Access Holding based out of Baltimore. And they've been a great sponsor to us. Their thesis is to buy and build enduring service businesses, which is what we are. And they've been an incredible partner in our journey to really build the funeral home of the future.
That's so creative. And I guess kind of unique in the capitalist world that capital will go to where a perceived need or opportunity exists. And I think that shines a light on the cleverness of our system.
Yes, for sure.
What do you see on the immediate horizon, the things that you have to be early on? There's no lack of talk about AI and ChatGPT. How do you see the new artificial intelligence, long language learning capabilities? Do you see that impacting your category at all?
We already have, I think there are as simple use cases as writing obituaries.
Sure.
Which some organizations have already put into practice. And I think that that's a great, easy use case for this. Mm-hmm. There are more complicated use cases for this that are probably more far out. Training AI algorithms to learn sort of from maybe even age groups younger than me, learning and then being able to replicate me when I'm gone, right? That's the sort of 100-year vision of then you have a Lee robot 100 years from now, right? Once I'm gone, that's already been trained to be me. That's that's the more far-fetched idea. But I think in the short term, the obituary memorialization, writing and collecting information, that's a big question mark in our field. I think the big difference today when I look back and think about a few generations back, someone would pass away and they were hyper local. They lived in a town, they had a bank account down the street, and maybe they had some investments. They were on paper. They had a broker in town. They passed away. There was a box. There was some paper in the box. There was a bank account. There was a checking. There was a savings. Now, there are these digital accounts. There are many of them. There are Facebook pages and Instagram pages and YouTube pages and LinkedIn profiles and websites that they own. And
therein lies an opportunity for you and your team at Foundation to prepare your funeral directors and your digital service capabilities to help families to deal with all of that.
Yeah, I don't think we'll provide all of these services. We partner with great partners that provide them. We vet the partners. This is not by any means we are a funeral home business at our core. We take care of families. We help them plan for and take care of them during some of their worst times in their lives. That is the core of our business. What I just described is a business in and of itself. And we partner with folks like a company called Good Trust, who handles sort of digital.
Oh, that makes sense.
Because
now, what about helping what of those tools help the families through the period you described that could potentially be one of the tougher times in their life? Are there tools that you use, that you prepare your funeral directors to have at their disposal to help families with that heavy grieving element that is oftentimes the case?
We do. We have local agencies that we work with, because many of these are locally based funeral homes. So we have local folks in their neighborhoods that are go-to partners for the funeral home, because there's grief counselors and different kinds of counseling that it's on an as needed basis for families. So we have recommendations, whether it's, we work with hospices. Obviously, this is before the death occurs, all the way to grief counseling for those families who need it. And we also work with services that help families close affairs. So that's another big time consumption piece after the fact. If somebody doesn't have a lawyer or an estate planner, how do you shut down not only all these digital accounts, but how do you start to manage affairs? One of our number one blog posts that gets read is, what do I do with fill in the blank stuff? Because people don't know. And they also don't know what to do with animals. So-and-so had a pet and my apartment.
Oh, sure.
Things you would never think about if you haven't been in those situations before, but families need information on all of this. And this is where the content comes in. So sort of when you asked about what's on the horizon, we really look at the opportunity to create a space where families can come, be connected with us, have a community, be able to purchase items, be able to purchase these services and these items that have been vetted, and be able to get all the information that they need regarding these subject matters.
And Lee, a topic that comes up in almost every conversation in a business context now, especially, is how do you deal with the sustainability question? Are there sustainability issues in your industry, and how are you addressing them?
There are. It's interesting because cremation is probably there are other forms of disposition that are becoming more and more popular, but there's still like aquamation. Okay. Cremation, but using high pressures of water. They're still very nascent. The machines are not where they need to be to serve the masses. Human composting, which is now legal in, I believe, 6 or 7 states.
What is human composting? I'm guessing ahead here.
It's composting of the body, so it's becoming soil. So
it can be turned back into the soil. Okay.
Exactly.
Because the product of a cremation, is that something that could or should be put into the soil, or is that toxic? Or
it's not toxic. It can be put into soil. It's actually less toxic than. Really, if you think, a lot of people would say that cremation is much better for the planet than burial, simply because what ends up going into the ground, the ashes themselves, is much less harmful than a body that's been embalmed in a metal casket or vault. So in that respect, cremation is a lot less harmful. And also cremains that are scattered at sea, for example, are biodegradable. So you've got that sort of situation that is much more helpful. We also do buy carbon offsets for all of our cremations.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we do. We buy carbon offsets for all of our cremations. And we also have a tree program where families will buy trees to commemorate loved ones, and we plant a tree on behalf of the tree. So if a family purchases a tree to commemorate someone's loss, we match that tree 1 for 1 to also help to offset any damage that we're doing as a company. This has, as you know, companies are hurting the earth irrespective of the business they're in, right? Simply, we have a carbon footprint simply by existing, right? So anything that we can do to help offset that, we try to do that. So we have our tree program, we have our carbon offset program. We've calculated the amount of carbon that a cremation emits, and then we buy against that.
Well, I really applaud the business model you're using in terms of saying, we're the funeral director, and our job as funeral director is to be the orchestra leader. And we're going to work with a hospice care on the front end of that funnel. We're going to work with hospitals. We're going to work with families who, in terms of pre-planning, so all the pre-stuff. And we're going to do what we do really well. And then we're going to have an array of approved service providers who help to fill in the blanks in terms of the needs of our families, all around that: counseling services, digital shutdown services, disposal services of stuff, pet care services. That's an interesting model. And I think it might be interesting for us at Flowers to spend more time with you, Lee. I'm sorry to force that on you. But I think what you're doing, I love your model. I love your service first model. And I think there's so many things that we could borrow from you and you from us in terms of rounding out how we and you serve the families that are in need at that moment, and do it in a very thoughtful and helpful kind of way.
No, I completely agree. I think that this category, there's so much room for us to improve. Whenever I think about this, I always say, how can we do better? Because families deserve better. And it's always been that if you're purchasing a $10,000 funeral, you get this amazing service, you get this first-class service. Okay, well, but all families deserve better. We live in a world where the internet and technology has democratized almost everything in our lives, right? You can have a private driver now with Uber or Lyft. You can get groceries delivered and you don't have to have a private shopper. I mean, technology has allowed us to expose information of every kind. You can have everything at your fingertips. So why not this category? You don't need to buy a $10,000 or $15,000 funeral to be able to have all of this information. We should be able to make it better for every family. The family who wants to spend $15,000, or the family who wants to spend $1,000 and wants to have a celebration of life at their home because that was mom's favorite place, because that's where she grew her roses. That's where grandkids came and ran around. So I always think about, we have an opportunity right now with where we sit in the world to create this amazing experience around a part of life that is a part of everybody's life. It's actually the only guaranteed part, even more so than taxes. No matter what, if you're born, you will experience passing. And so why not actually...
Oh, wait a minute. I disagree with you, because I have no plans of going, Lee.
I have no plans either, but...
Lee, I can see why you're so successful at Foundation Partners. I can see why they consider themselves very lucky to have found you and to have you. And I could see why families are really privileged to get to work with you and your partner funeral directors there, because of your companies and your approach to how you do business. And you do business with, if I can serve you in the way that's appropriate for you, we'll all do better at the end. And that's and at the end is the appropriate term here. But thank you for spending time with us today. There's so much more. I hope we get to do this again, because what you're doing, there's an evolution and it's speeding up. And I think it's a difficult subject that a lot of people, a lot of families have questions, and you have the answers. And I dare say, I guess 3 years ago when you started at Foundation Partners, the scope of things that you would do is probably 100 times what you thought it would be. And I guess in the next 3 years, it'll be 100 times more again.
Yeah, I hope so, because I'm really enjoying it.
Good. Well, I think you're enjoying it because you're providing a good and genuine service. And that's pretty rewarding at the end of the day, even when your husband makes fun of you at the dinner table with new friends.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's really a privilege to be able to work for an organization that has a mission. And when you get to wake up every day and think about how do I get to make a day better for someone else.
Nice. And on that note, thank you for making our day better, Lee.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim. I really appreciate it. And how much fun did I have today? Thank you.
All right. Great, Lee. Thanks.
Take care.
It's my sister's birthday.
Go to 1-800-Flowers.com.
They have tons of great birthday gifts.
Wow.
Wow.
Happy birthday, baby.
Ow.
Yummy. I got to contain myself.
1-800-Flowers.
Celebrate the people you love.
Well, I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and I know I'll be sharing it forward. I hope you get to as well. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow me along on Twitter at Jim1800Flowers and on LinkedIn at Jim McCann. Hope to talk to you soon.